Good day, everyone. My name is Mahlatse Innocent Malatji. So, to introduce myself, I'll be going to the presentation where I wrote a background about myself. As I've already stated, my name is Mahlatse Innocent Maake Malatji. I'm currently a PhD student in commercial law at the University of Cape Town. In addition to being a junior research fellow for the project on cases on open learning, I'm also a coordinator for student housing and residence life, an ad hoc lecturer at law, both at the University of Cape Town. My presentation is on the role of small grants to support open educational resources development at the University of Cape Town and the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Moving forward, I'll be discussing what study. Although the study is based on the role of small grants to support open educational resources development at the University of Cape Town and Cape Peninsula University of Technology, it is important to note what prompted the study. Thus, there are various aspects behind development of OERs. One key aspect is the high cost of educational resources such as textbooks, which contributes to the inequalities in access to education. Although the government provides funding through the National Student Financial Aid Scheme to assist students from disadvantaged backgrounds, this fund is not sufficient to provide for all students' needs, especially considering that textbook costs are increasing yearly. As a consequence, the cost of educational resources become one of the major hindrances to lifelong learning. Therefore, the ambition to provide access to free education in South Africa may cease its achievement. Hence, I mentioned that free tuition for higher education should exist hand in hand with access to free accessible study materials created and that are made available for students. This is to say, open educational resources that are created and readily available can potentially all students access to free resources. Looking into the definition of open learning as provided in the DHET's policy mentioned earlier, we find that this policy also recognizes real barriers to access to learning. In this study, it is posited that OERs contribute to the removal of such barriers. However, the underlying challenge that will always remain is with the development of this risk, because development in this way is tied to things. Thus, although financial assistance through grants may be the leading reason or even a challenge in the production of open educational resources, other things may deter the production process. These challenges will be discussed in detail when I discuss the findings of the study. Moreover, it has been proven that the increasing cost of teaching and learning resources is one of the key challenges facing higher education institutions. The inequalities concerning access to learning opportunities are highlighted in the government's white paper. Moreover, the white paper recommended incorporating open educational resources as one of the ways to build an expanded, effective, and integrated post-school system, and mentions that assistance in the development of open educational resources will be from public and private organizations. In this case, UCT and CPUT were chosen as institutions that had received funding for open educational resources development. Despite this, the DHET's open learning policy situates creating and sharing high quality teaching and learning resources such as open educational resources at the heart of the open learning agenda. The policy also suggests a range of diverse funding strategies to support the development of open educational resources. In my study, focus is placed on one funding strategy, namely institutional OER grants at 2 institutions of higher education in South Africa, to illustrate the implementation of a successful funding strategy in support of this policy framework. With that being said, OERs provide an opportunity to alleviate some of the key economic challenges associated with access to free and open learning materials. Specific to the funding provisions for OER development in South Africa, various organizations continue to sponsor OER development at institutional levels, and also funding initiatives seems to be mostly donor or institutionally funded. Although creation of OER has been seen to be important, not all OERs developed had sufficient, even financial assistance, which lead us to the next slide. Also, the study had to account various support the movement of educational resources. Firstly, the DHET's Open Learning Policy Framework for Post-School Education and Training of 2017 is the most probable policy that is used in this study. This policy suggests a range of diverse funding strategies to support the development of open educational resources in the third sector. Although both institutions have individual policies, as you can see below, which were adopted by both council from both universities in 2014, this institution have no funding provisions stipulated for OER development in their policies. The principal question underlying this study is how have open educational resources grants supported the development of open educational resources in order to contribute to a socially just higher education. Also, we need to look at the methods that have been used in the study. The method used in my study is desktop research, which has been supported by in-depth interviews. My interviews included 8 participants with 1 OER grant manager and 3 grant recipients per institution. This leads us to the findings of the study. The findings in this study are characterized into 3, which is small grants, small institutional grants, cost reduction, language recognition, and bringing in the student's voice. So the first one is the institutional small grants. So both universities have sourced funding to generate the small grants. UCT grants included the Shuttleworth Foundation, which started in 2008-2009, the Vice Chancellor's OER Adaptation Project from 2013 to 2016, the Digital Open Text for Development, which was funded by the Canada's International Development Research Center, which started in 2016 to 2020, and also the UCT Teaching Innovation Grant, which started in 2018 and is ongoing. So CPUT had institutional grants, which include the DHET Teaching Development Grant from 2015 to 2017 and DHET's University Capacity Development Grant of 2018. Moving forward, we look at the findings on cost reduction. The findings have proved that economic support in the form of small grants alleviates costs for development of open educational resources. Moreover, there was consensus across all grant recipients and OER grant managers in both institutions that there is a need to create more open educational resources. These grants were from various sources, including private organizations, the institutions themselves, and the government as well. Although the largest amount received by the grant recipient is 10,000 per recipient, recipients from both universities acknowledged the privilege of receiving a grant to enhance this kind of work. This is to say, the findings have proved that some resources would have not been created without the grant. Therefore, with the grant in place, grant recipients made to develop these resources, whilst others were motivated to develop and adapt OERs to address the economic inequalities that impede access to many. The grant recipients developed OERs such as glossaries with voice-over text, images, videos, and screencasts. However, the findings also proved that in some instances, the grants cover the full cost of the development, which remains a challenge as well. Going to the second finding, which is on language recognition. The creation of open educational resources development enabled a degree of cultural recognition of marginalized groups through translation and production of locally contextualized resources. These resources were translated into isiXhosa and Afrikaans, only focusing on these dominant languages that are used in the Western Cape. Recognition of local languages was viewed as a means of enhancing learning for students whose home language is not English. So, development in this way had been propelled from the stance that a lot of the developed resources need a Southern perspective or interpretation to make them more accessible to our students. The resources developed are still in use and are available online via institutional repositories or external websites such as YouTube. Access to these materials is for anyone. However, in some cases, students need an internet connection to access these materials. In addition, the development of these resources made some of the grant recipients visible within their institutions and beyond. Going to our last finding, which is bringing in the student voice. So the findings have proved that the development of open educational resources require multi-stakeholder collaboration. See, in these two institutions, the collaboration has been between grant recipients and students was key in OER development, thus incorporating student voices into the resources. Despite collaboration with students, grant recipients had the opportunity for external collaborative support, which means collaboration was extended to other external parties for technical support, resource production processes, and content experts in some cases. This included from professional interpreters who had assisted in translating concepts and voiceover artists and sound engineers who assisted in producing the resources. In some cases, lectures were used to confirm whether the translated content fits into the context of their teaching subjects. In addition, language specialists and field specialists were used to verify the translated content. However, with all these findings emerged a lot of challenges that have an impact on the development process and dissemination. So, accordingly, grant recipients in both institutions highlighted various challenges impacting the production process, which includes time. So, some OER developers had run out of time to complete their projects, Hence, the development of the OER has been noted as time-consuming and a resource-intensive task. Also, insufficient funds. The findings have proved that funding for this project was a challenge. Due to this, the findings have proved that there is an ongoing need for financial support from institutions to fund creation of open educational resources, as lack of financial support is a barrier on the development of these resources. In addition, there was difficulty in recruiting external stakeholders. That's to say, it is even worse in that external parties' usage requires much time and consequently is needs lots of resources. As noted by one of the grant recipients, there were not enough specialists in her project, and it was also difficult to recruit voiceover artists. That is to say, although students could translate the content from English to other languages, language specialists must be used in order for them to verify the translated content. The recruitment of open educational resources, as the lecturer had to spend time finding the experts, was insufficient to pay the ideal experts. So moving to the recommendations, this comprehensive study had led to a few recommendations. Although the study was initially conducted without student participation, it is recommended by the author that future studies must include student perspectives through surveys, focus groups, or even interviews. This is so because the student voice is key. Hence, in the absence of this, it has been difficult to measure the extent of the influence of these open educational resources in ameliorating economic, cultural, and political injustices as a means to facilitate student access and success. Secondly, there is a need for recognition of OER developers through staff appraisals and promotions. Thus, institutional recognition should be given to OER developers through staff appraisals and promotion in order to make them to want to form part of these initiatives in future. In addition, there is a need for more government and private external funding to support the development of OERs. Support can be offered to all institutions in South Africa, not just this institution that the study is on. For instance, a shared database of multilingual glossaries could, on the other hand, help leverage the funding resources and reduce the duplication of efforts amongst institutions, while on the other hand, having institutional collaboration could enhance scalability. Although these resources are freely shared on either institutional repositories or external websites, high connectivity is still a challenge. Accordingly, it is also recommended that there is a need for zero-rated websites to enable access to these open educational resources. Accordingly, the concern should be on how funding can be reserved and increasing access to these resources. Lastly, there is a need for collaborative authorship models with colleagues and students. In this way, students' involvement can potentially empower them to grow as co-developers of content. The involvement of students in the development of OER can assist in evaluating the effectiveness of these resources. Thus, students have a voice by contributing to teaching and learning through the development of open educational resources. This marks the end of my presentation, and I've referenced the authors that I've used in the presentation here. And lastly, my acknowledgements goes to Dr. Glenda Cox for constant supporting me and mentoring me throughout my writing journey. And they provide the citation of this chapter.